Why haven't we reached other stars yet? Chapter 1. The Space Between. Imagine waking up in a cabin that hums like a cathedral organ, a narrow band of light shivering along the edge of an observation window. The stars outside are so dense they look like powdered sugar sifted onto velvet, except they don't twinkle here. There is no atmosphere to bend their light. One of those stars is your destination, a wee ember, faint as a wish. You're not lonely exactly, you're overwhelmed. Between you and that spark is a night so deep and wide that even words stumble. You press a hand to the glass and think the question that has haunted dreamers for a century, why haven't we reached the other stars yet? It's not a weak question. It's the kind that can keep a species honest. We like to say we are explorers, navigators by nature. Our ancestors walked out of Africa with only bone tools and stubbornness. We crossed oceans on creaking hulls. We learned to fly, then to cast metal into the upper atmosphere, and one summer day we pressed our boots into the sea of tranquility and brought dust home in bags. Now, though, we face a frontier that refuses to shrink when we draw closer. The solar system we can navigate, the galaxy resists. The short answer is distance. But distance is not a number on a signpost. It is a biography of obstacles, energy, time, biology, psychology, politics, economics, materials, and risk. Every obstacle carries others on its back, like a caravan of camels that refuses to end. The long answer is the story of what it takes, not just to aim a machine at another sun, but to do it with care, with survival in mind, with dignity, and with the humility to admit that the universe is large and we are not. Let's begin at the scale that mocks our intuitions. A light year is the distance light travels in 1 year. Light is fast, about 300,000 kilometers per second fast, and yet, even at that speed, it takes 4¼ years to reach the nearest star, Proxima Centauri. We cannot ride on light. Our fastest probes exit the solar system doing tens of kilometers per second, not thousands. If a runner on a track is light, our probes are toddlers learning to walk. At those speeds, an interstellar journey would take tens of thousands of years, not the stuff of travel brochures. But distance is also energy. To go faster, you must pay dearly in fuel or cunning. The cost does not rise gently, it skyrockets. The rocket equation is the merciless accountant. To push a payload faster, you need fuel. To carry more fuel, you need more fuel to push that fuel. And very soon your sleek starship becomes a flying tank that mostly hauls propellant, with the ship something of a rounding error. We can cheat the accountant with high-efficiency engines, with fusion dreams or beams of light pushing reflective sails, but each cheat brings a new invoice due in engineering complexity. Even if we pay the energy cost, time rears up again. To send a machine that arrives centuries from now is a kind of faith. Faith that anyone will be listening, that the data will matter, that our descendants will still care. To send people is an even greater leap of trust. A generation ship is a city in a tube rolling through a vacuum where sunlight is a rumor. Children would be born and die without ever standing under an open sky. Imagine governance, education, justice, culture, love, grief, art, all of it sealed and pressurized, guarded by radio and math. Can we keep a city wise for centuries while the only view is the slow drift of dust? Maybe, but that maybe is a tender thing to place at the mercy of infinity. Biology breaks open other questions. Our bodies evolved under blue skies, with cycles of day and night, with magnetic fields and gravity gently pressing our bones. In microgravity, bones leak calcium and become brittle. Muscles shrink when they are not asked to work. Radiation slithers through shielding with the patience of a ghost, damaging DNA, kindling cancers, teasing neurons. The longer we're out there, the more we must become gardeners of our own cells, shielding better, spinning habitats to fake gravity, editing genes, or learning to sleep deeply for long stretches like whales beneath the ice. Hibernation has flirted with science fiction for a century. The biology is complicated, and the human brain is not built for off switches and easy restarts. Yet the promise tempts. If you can sleep the centuries, then perhaps the voyage can slip past your mind like a single winter night. Then there is the medium itself. Space is not emptiness. It is a thin ocean of dust and ions, and at high speed even a grain of sand can be a bullet. A starship punching through that ocean at a fraction of light speed will ask its front to bear the brunt of countless micro-collisions. A fleck the size of a seed could puncture a hull. A pebble could end the mission. Shields can help. Magnetic fields can shepherd charged particles, and the ship can become a wedge of layered sacrificial materials, but all of it adds mass, which demands energy, which demands more mass. Again, the accountant smiles. Those are the physical hurdles, and they would be daunting even if our species were a hive of unanimity. But we are also political creatures, and politics is physics with poles. We allocate resources with arguments and beliefs. We are brilliant, yes, but we are also easily distracted by the latest crisis that erupts inside our horizons. Catastrophes at home tug attention away from the patient, quiet work of building tools for generations we'll never meet. The market prefers quarterly profits. Democracies prefer election cycles. Autocracies prefer monuments that testify to the ruler rather than investments that enrich strangers in a century. How do you sell a mission whose success is a message, faint and profound, arriving long after all its founders are gone? Economics, the ledger lines of our ambition. The first interstellar mission is not a single craft. It is a civilization-scale project. It demands not just money, but industries. Engine factories, radiation labs, space habitats, cryogenic farms, fusion startups that grow into utilities, beamer arrays on the moon and in the outer system, supply chains that run from mining asteroids to printing superconductors by the kilometer. An interstellar mission is the tip of a spear. The shaft is everything else a spacefaring economy must become. Without that shaft, the tip is a toy sharp, perhaps, but buoyed by hope alone. Still, we shouldn't confuse difficulty with impossibility. The road exists because physics allows it. We have stared at the map, penciled routes, and even built some of the carts. We have 2-century-old mathematics that says the problem is grim but not forbidden. And we have prototypes or whispers of prototypes. Think of a sail not of canvas but of atoms-thick film, gossamer and bright, pushed by light itself. Think of a mirror the size of a nation, or a lattice of many mirrors stitched together by lasers, hurling a fingernail-sized probe to a star in a human lifetime. The payload is tiny, the beam array is vast, and the engineering is ferocious, but the numbers flirt with feasibility. This is not magic. It's planning mixed with patience. Fusion is the other flame we cup in our hands. If we can coax light from hydrogen in a bottle, a controlled sun tamed in a magnetic cradle, then the energy density becomes our ally. Fusion rockets promise exhaust velocities that slash journey times from millennia to centuries or decades. But a promise is not a ship. Fusion on Earth is still learning to behave, and even when a reactor sings steadily, shrinking it, hardening it against radiation, making it sip fuel and spit thrust with precision, all while it vibrates through vacuum, requires a kind of engineering both heroic and boring. Heroic in its danger, boring in its daily rigor. A future in which fusion lights the path to other stars will look, up close, like factories, inspection schedules, shift changes, committees that argue over gasket tolerances, and seniors training apprentices who no longer find the stars exotic. Antimatter, the candle of the gods. A milligram holds the energy of rockets' worth of fuel, but we don't have the habit of making it cheaply or storing it safely. Antimatter hates normal matter with a passion so pure it annihilates. The bottle must be perfect and strong. It must also be weightless, which is a contradiction in terms. We may learn to make it by the gram with space-based collectors, or we may decide it is a spice too dangerous for the stew. All of this implies a path, however long, and the path implies a reason. Why go? The question is rude only if we're insecure. Going is our style, but humans flourish when reasons are clear. Science is one answer. Other stars host other worlds, and no microscope on Earth can see the life that might swim in an alien ocean. Security is another. A species that bets its survival on one rock, under one sun, is playing an elegant game with terrible odds. We also go for art, for story, for the way a new horizon opens, and something inside us expands to meet it. We go because our children deserve weather that we have not yet named. Yet we haven't gone, not fully, because the prelude is enormous. We are building the instruments that will write the first note of the symphony, and preludes are hard to fund. The first steps look small. Better telescopes to find worlds that might welcome us, better propulsion in our own backyard, a mature logistics network from low Earth orbit to the outer planets, the legal scaffolding that prevents the worst of our terrestrial sins from colonizing the void. There will be accidents, scandals, failures that cost lives, and critics who say the money should plant trees and feed children. They are right. We must do those too. We have the wealth to heal and explore if we choose both with discipline. Choice, perhaps the most honest obstacle. Each generation chooses whether to add a stone to the road. We are not stopped by physics alone, but by will. The will must be steady across a century. That steadiness is rare, but not mythical. When cathedrals were built, those who laid cornerstones knew they would never stand in the completed nave. Yet they lifted stones anyway. The first interstellar mission will be such a cathedral. Some will hammer alloy, others draft statutes, others design school curricula that teach children how to think across long arcs of time. The carrying capacity of a culture for patience is a technology as real as a reactor. Patience is not passivity. It is the art of doing the next right thing, and there are next right things to do now. We can reach farther in our own system, carve habitats that spin, build greenhouses that turn sun and water into breath and bread, test our psychology in closed worlds where the only storms are in minds and machines. We can build beaming stations on airless rock, perfect reflective sails, teach small probes to fly in swarms and talk to one another like birds. We can design ships that are their own ecosystems, with microbes as co-workers and plants as quiet colleagues. We can practice law that respects fragile habitats and the rights of those who will be born far from Earth. We can develop rituals for grief in vacuum and holidays that mark the turning of a cylinder rather than a planet. This is how the impossible becomes routine, by making dinner, by fixing leaks, by deciding who takes out the trash. When we speak of risk, we must be candid. The first courageous missions will almost certainly fail if failure means do not arrive with the full cargo intact. But failure can be a teacher and a message. If a probe breaks at 100th of light speed, we'll learn. If a beam wobbles, if a mirror heats, if dust shreds the edge of a sail, we'll learn. We can afford 1,000 failures in robotic probes and still be richer in knowledge than the most extravagant armchair committee. We should build failure into the budget and pride into the repairs. There is another reason we haven't gone. The stars are not just far, they are also moving. Orbits are dance steps in a swirling ballroom. The rooms are not still. They are carried along in a grander swirl. When we pick a target, we are not pointing at where it is, but where it will be. That requires a choreography of prediction that we can do but must do perfectly. It is not simply launching a dart, but hurling it from a carousel toward a target thrown by another carousel across a field of wind and whispers. The mathematics is precise and patient. Precision takes patience. Patience takes culture. The stars are a mirror that reflects not only our technology, but our maturity. Sometimes, when we say we haven't reached the stars, what we mean is we haven't felt worthy. Not worthy in a moralizing sense, but in the sense of readiness. To cross oceans, we didn't only need ships, we needed maps, stories, weather sense, rope that wouldn't rot, knots that could be taut with hands and eyes. We needed superstitions to keep sailors from picking fights at the wrong time and songs to keep them rowing. For the stars, our songs will be different. They might be code and governance. They might be schools that teach boredom as a skill, because in the long dark, boredom can be fatal if it spirals into nihilism. They might be art that staves off loneliness and rituals that bind small communities in spinning tin. If that sounds mundane, that's because the stars are not conquered by heroes alone. They are reached by custodians, by those who tighten bolts and carry traditions. The road between suns is a maintenance schedule with poetry threaded through it. Look again at that window. The faint ember you aim for is not an abstraction somewhere there. A planet may circle, perhaps with oceans or deserts, with mornings that crack like glass. Maybe an aurora wraps around its poles, green curtains rippling, stirred by a magnetic field that hums like a drum. Maybe no life oxygenates that sky, and every rock is pure testimony. You are the first to see this place. First is a kind of sacrament. It carries responsibilities, to witness, to record, to leave intact what must be intact, to take risks for knowledge but not for vanity. Why haven't we reached other stars yet? Because the space between is honest about the price and will not bargain. Because the invoice is not only in money, but in centuries. Because our bodies and our polities are still learning stamina. Because we have not yet chosen to build the cathedral with the required stubbornness. Because yet is not a soft word, it is a promise attached to a reckoning. Do not mistake delay for defeat. In the last century, our species taught metal to think and glass to see into the past literally, as telescopes collect ancient light and assemble it into images of galaxies whose youth is older than our planet. We learned to edit genomes and to weld titanium in vacuum. We will, if we choose, learn to slip small, swift scouts between stars and to cradle fragile communities through winter-length voyages. When the first interstellar message returns, a whisper of a new sun flaring off the dish of an antenna array in some quiet valley, there will be a silence before the cheer, the silence where we recognize that this is what we have been practicing, patience amplified into triumph. Between now and then is work, plain, beautiful work. We'll gather sunlight on the moon and focus it into spears. We'll weave sails so thin they're gossamer and yet strong as the poems we write on bad days to remind ourselves that meaning exists. We'll solve the ordinary problems that make extraordinary things possible. Algae that doesn't overgrow its tank, seals that don't off-gas toxins, software that fails gracefully, courts that arbitrate conflicts between captains and farmers living in habitat rings, elders who remember the first launch and teach children the duets of duty and delight. We haven't reached the stars yet, because growing up takes time. Not the time of months and budgets, but of culture, the time it takes to knit the story of us wide enough that it can include people who will be born under unfamiliar suns. When we are ready, we will look up not as petitioners but as partners, not as thieves but as students. We will go not to conquer but to converse. We will become, at last, the kind of animal that can carry its small hearth into the deep and keep it burning without devouring the dark it moves through. And one dawn, in a control room that smells like ozone and coffee, because some things never change, a line will appear on a monitor, a heartbeat from another system, a data stream like rain beginning. The room will fall quiet, and you will feel the old ache in your chest, the one that first rose when you pressed your hand against a window and measured the night with your palm. Someone will say, "We have it," and the silence will break into sound, and in that noise, you will hear the end of a very long prelude and the first bright chord of a song we have been trying to sing since we learned to draw constellations in ash. We haven't reached the stars yet, but the road is real. The road is being built, and everything that seems too large collapses, eventually, into the next step you can take before lunch. In the next chapter, we will trade broad strokes for blueprints. We'll take apart the leading concepts: beamed sails, fusion drives, generation habitats, hibernation, artificial gravity, shielding, communication lags, and put them back together into a practical architecture that could, within the span of a human lifetime, send our first true ambassadors toward a neighboring sun. The dream will stay vast, but the screws and seams will come into view. Chapter 2: Blueprints for a Bridge of Light. The balcony outside Mission Control juts over a desert flat like the prow of a ship. At dawn, the array gleams thousands of mirrors, wafer-thin and vigilant, turning in slow harmony to drink the first light. Engineers murmur in 3 languages. Children on a field trip press foreheads to glass. The speaker hums with a woman's voice, even and calm. Power to the phased lattice, 96%. Thermal peak within bounds. Beam path solution converged. This is how the cathedral begins. Not with trumpets, but with alignment. Not with a countdown, but with calibration. We promised blueprints, not poetry. But every blueprint is secretly a poem about limits and possibility. To answer the question, why haven't we reached other stars yet? With a plan, we have to turn each obstacle from Chapter 1 into a design problem with parts numbers and test campaigns. We have to assign responsibilities to materials, to currents, to governance, and to patience. We have to choose our first bridge. 2 bridges, actually. One is fast and small, A beamed sail scout, no crew, a camera the size of your fingernail, a brain like a dragonfly's but fluent in vacuum. The other is slow and large, a fusion-driven habitat capable, one day, of ferrying 1,000 lives in a cylinder that spins like a quiet carnival ride. The scout informs the city follows the scout, and between them grows an economy of preparation. Beams and gossamer. A sail is not a metaphor. It's a sheet no thicker than a whisper, built to be shoved by light. A photon carries momentum without mass. Enough of them, disciplined into a column, can push. The sail works because surfaces can be made nearly perfect, reflective, low absorption, low mass per area, and because mirrors can be made to act like one mirror, even when they are separated by kilometers. A phased array, each tile nodding in time, stitching its light with thousands of siblings into a single lance. Where do we put the mirrors? On Earth, the atmosphere wobbles beams into snakes. In orbit, mirrors must be launched and refueled. The moon offers a compromise, elegant in its stubbornness, airless, stable, close enough to repair, hostile enough to discourage tourists. The beam arrays live in lunar craters like silver gardens. They drink sunlight through concentrators and feed it to lasers through power electronics that sigh but never sleep. Each tile listens to a choreography of microsecond instructions, tilting by fractions of degrees so that the light column remains thinner than a thumb across millions of kilometers. The sail itself, a patchwork of metamaterials patterned at scales smaller than a wavelength to control how light shoves. It ripples like a lake in wind, but the ripples are calculated, not chaotic. Embedded in the fabric are tiny diodes and sensors, nervous tissue, to keep the gossamer from tearing itself to lace. The payload at the center is a cube no larger than a dice. Camera, spectrometer, star tracker, processors hardened against radiation and boredom, a laser to blink home. Acceleration is brutal and brief. For minutes, maybe hours at most, the beam drives the sail to a fraction of light speed. The numbers are hair-raising, tens of thousands of Gs if you accept them, or clever tricks to spread force and spare components. The sail shrieks silently as it heats. Active cooling bleeds away what the material cannot reject by radiation. Then the beam falls off. The sail, now a needle skating through night, coasts. You might ask, how do you steer a sail launched by a distant hand? By wiggling. Tiny changes to reflectivity across the sail face, tiny tilts, tiny magnetic fields to deflect charged dust. The craft is a fish understanding currents it cannot see, guided by a school of algorithms that watch stars slide and pulsars tick. Navigation at high speeds turns starlight into a compass. Relativistic aberration makes the forward sky contract into a bright circle, and the craft learns to keep its eye on that shrinking iris. Deceleration is the ugly cousin. With no beaming station at the destination, the scout flashes through the system in a blaze of drive-by science. That's not failure. Data at close range, hours of it, seconds of it, can be richer than centuries of looking from far away. But we also practice braking, magnetic sails that spread wisps of field ahead like a parachute, stealing speed from the charged particles in the interstellar medium. Electric sails that spool out long, charged tethers to pluck momentum from the plasma wind. None of this is free. The price is mass. But the art is compromise, and for some missions, a slower trip that ends gently is worth an earlier launch that ends in a blur. Communication is a second art. A gram-scale probe cannot shout. It whispers with a needle-thin laser, pointing its message back at Earth's mirror eyes. Those eyes must be enormous. We build them, too. Arrays in deserts, and on the far side of the moon, detectors that catch single photons and string them into sentences. Error-correcting codes grow baroque to survive dust and drift. Clocks lose arguments with temperature and time, and so the probe carries friends. Redundant oscillators that disagree in productive ways, allowing the brain to triangulate truth from bickering. Why start with sails? Because they force us to practice the skills we need anyway. Precision manufacturing, high-power beaming, thermal management, autonomous navigation, communication across light years, and the politics of funding a thing that returns a reward after the election cycle, but before the century is done. Sails are the scouts that make politicians look wise. Fire in a bottle. A city cannot ride a sail too heavy, too tender. It needs a furnace that sips rather than gulps. Fusion is the dream we court. Deuterium and helium-3 gently pressed to marry, or deuterium and tritium forced into a brief, volatile union. The exhaust from such a marriage shouts in particles that can be magnetically cupped and thrown aft. The promise is specific impulse, how much push you get per kilogram of propellant, orders of magnitude better than chemical rockets. The peril is everything else. A fusion ship is a power plant, wrapped in a cooling system, wrapped in a radiator, wrapped in a life. It bristles with the ugliness of function magnets coiling like steel pythons, radiation vaults the size of houses, coolant loops that remind you of rivers trying to remember where to go. And then, at the end of all that ferocity, you see green. Aft, in the long spin hab, hydroponic terraces curve under lamps that mimic high latitudes in spring. Water murmurs. Children chase each other along a corridor that bends out of sight. Someone is baking bread. The drive has options. Inertial confinement, fusion pellets of fuel ignited by lasers or ion beams, in rapid pulses, or magnetic confinement, plasma trapped and heated in a magnetic bottle, coaxed to the cusp of calm explosion. A hybrid may emerge, a heartbeat of controlled blasts feeding a steady river of thrust. The exhaust leaves through a magnetic nozzle that never touches flame. It shapes charged particles into a coherent jet, like a trumpet that plays with fields instead of brass. Shielding is not negotiable. Neutrons spill from one kind of fusion like ghosts. They cannot be steered by magnets and will gnaw at matter until stopped. You place water and plastic where it matters. You breed fresh fuel in blankets designed for that purpose. You accept that parts will sicken and need replacing. The ship is both monastery and factory. It prays with rituals of maintenance. Artificial gravity is a courtesy to bones and moods. The ship's habitation ring spins at a rate low enough to keep inner ears from rebelling under 2 revolutions per minute if you can afford the rim to be wide. The wider the ring, the slower you can spin for the same gravity. The structure swells to accommodate human comfort, and mass climbs and engines sigh. But every kilogram in the habitat carries many kilograms of justification in the medical ledger. Above all else, you are building a school for children of a starless night. Tutors deserve floors that make sense. The ship's nose wears armor against dust, a Whipple shield, layers of thin plates set apart, designed so that impact turns bullets into ions and ions into heat in stages, each layer sacrificing itself to spare the next. Ahead of even that rides a sparse cloud of vapor, a sacrificial veil boiled from an ice tank, partly ionized and shaped by magnetic fields into a forward cushion. The ship swims behind its own small comet. Bussard scoops those elegant funnels that drink interstellar hydrogen and feed it to the engine, make for lovely covers on magazines, but stubborn math, at high speed, drag from the scoop may exceed the benefit from captured fuel unless the field is vast and patience vaster. We do not forbid the dream. We file it next to antimatter in the cabinet labeled, "Later, when factories are stars. I, the city that moves." For generations on a starship, logistics is culture. You cannot separate the list of spares from the list of virtues. Air is a commons. Water is a democracy. Waste is a teacher. Every banana peel is a syllabus in nitrogen. The habitat is a biosphere engineered to forgive. Algae and microbes do the heaviest lifting. Plants provide dignity and vitamins and small astonishments. Pollinators are robots, and then, later, children with brushes, until the ship relearns bees. Governance? Too loose and you get drift. Too tight and you get rebellion, whose cost is measured in air pressure. Many designs propose layers, a charter drafted on Earth and ratified anew every generation, a council elected in rhythms that harmonize with schooling and harvest, a captaincy limited by law to the ship's safety and the oath of protection for the weakest. Justice emphasizes restoration over punishment. Cells are for broken circuits, not broken people, because exile is a death sentence, and death is a tax you pay rarely if you are careful. Education is the prime industry. Every job is taught with a story of why it matters. Children learn to read using maintenance manuals that fold into tales. Once Upon a Time is followed by instructions on how to bleed a radiator. Old skills survive because they make meaning. New skills emerge because boredom is the enemy. And a good school is a laboratory disguised as a theater. Hibernation may join this culture but should never be its skeleton. If we learn induced torpor safely cooling bodies, modulating metabolism, protecting brains, easing in and easing out, then voyages can be made by crews who sleep most of the time, waking in watches like monks to tend the engine and the gardens. But you never bet the ship on a sleep you don't know how to end. Redundancy wears many clothes. Awake crews paired with sleepers, robots paired with humans, rules paired with rituals. IV. Law for a long horizon. The law is scaffolding for behavior you hope never to see. Before launch, earth-bound jurists and ship-borne candidates draft the Interstellar Commons Charter. It says obvious things and sacred things. The ship owns itself. No Earth nation can command it once the light time exceeds sanity. The crew has rights: air, water, education, health care, fair process. Descendants are not property of an ancestral decision. They have a right to return if the ship swings by a friendly port. Contact protocols forbid the contamination of living worlds. Curiosity does not outrank respect. If sentient neighbors exist, a slow hello is better than a fast intrusion. Property aboard is real, but the ship remains the ultimate landlord. Your window is yours until the hull needs it. Votes are weighted by adulthood, not seniority. Children are citizens whose guardians borrow their power. Holidays are invented with purpose. An annual first light day, when the ship turns its lamps down to let the Milky Way burn across the cylinder's sky. A yearly accounting where quotas and dreams are read aloud side by side. V. The economy of the road. Nothing moves between stars until 1,000 small businesses thrive between Earth and the asteroids. That is not a slogan, it's a purchasing order. The beamer arrays require lunar mining for aluminum, silicon, rare earths. The sails demand clean rooms and nanofabrication. The fusion ship needs helium-3, which the moon's regolith hoards in whispers, and the outer planet's atmospheres consider dust in their pockets. Asteroid water becomes propellant and life. Space tugs push and tug in a ballet of invoices. This economy has to make sense without the romance. Power beaming finds clients in Earth orbit and on the night side of the moon where machinery gets cold and lonely. Space-based solar power sells electricity back to Earth through microwaves tuned to stay polite in the atmosphere. Precision mirrors do double duty as climate tools shading coral reefs, focusing light for agriculture in wintering valleys. The Interstellar line items piggyback on services that voters understand in their kitchen bills. V. The test campaign. A cathedral is built in stones. A starship is built in missions. Each success buys the next risk. Leo sails. In low Earth orbit, we practice shaping sails with sunlight, trimming them with voltage patterns, damping oscillations with algorithms that learn the sail's moods. We tear them. We retune them. We learn. Cislunar beams. On the moon, we lay the first mirrors like a farmer lays irrigation pipe, except our crop is photons. With small power, we learn pointing. We heat regolith by accident and apologize to dust. With more power, we push test masses, then test sails between lunar orbit and cislunar space, juggling beam safety so no off-course light trespasses on Earth. Interplanetary scouts. The first true beamed sails slingshot past Mars, then the outer planets, returning postcards stitched from photons with a frame rate of patience. We break one into Neptune's wind with an electric sail. Data becomes morale. Interstellar precursor. A sail rides the beam to 1/10 of light speed and heads for the empty dark above the ecliptic. It samples dust and fields across hundreds of astronomical units, mapping hazard and help. It takes a decade instead of a century. Its transmissions teach deserts on Earth to listen. Alpha Proximate. A gram-scale probe goes for Alpha Centauri, or for Barnard's star, or for a target selected by telescopes that have learned to weigh air on alien worlds by the thinnest of wobbles. The beam burns hard. The Earth rotates under gimbaled arrays that stitch their light across the sky without violating any treaty or safety zone. The probe arrives in a human lifetime, flashes through the system in hours, and shovels its attention into coherent light that limps home, heroic and thin. Ring 1. In orbit around the moon, a habitat ring spins with everything but children aboard at first. It learns, it leaks, it heals. Crews play long games, practice conflict, practice therapy, learn boredom management, write the first ship cookbook with stains on the margins. Drive test. A fusion core lights in deep space, guarded by distance and by rules. A small ship with heavy shields practices burns far from any world. The first exhaust leaves a signature in the sky like a new kind of comet. The scientific instruments we sent to watch this event pay for themselves in a dozen PhDs and one new legal footnote about private sons. The shakedown habitat. A full-scale spin hab hooks to its drive and spends 15 years darting in and out of the outer planets, testing emergencies you hope never to see. Fire in a segment, sudden shadow over farms, reactor hiccup that becomes an opera of checklists. The crew returns older and esteemed, carrying protocols that read like scripture. The first arc. Not an interstellar launch. Not yet. A long slingshot to the heliopause and back, riding the ship's own field against the solar wind, demonstrating that the vessel can thrive beyond the sun's magnetic cradle. The crew comes home with ice in their hair and a new gait to their step. Gravity feels heavier in both senses. If this sequence looks like a lifetime, that's because it is. But note how the calendar overlaps. While scouts fly, treaties mature. While arrays hum in craters, children learn to vacuum dust from hinge joints. While engineers argue about radiator fins, artists argue about how to paint a sunless dawn. Via the psychology of distance, we consider what distance does to the mind. We build rituals that keep small things large. The Friday parade through the farms where everyone brings one thing they made that week with their hands. The silent hour when the ship's lights dim and the sky screens brighten with a panorama of the universe outside in real time, reminding everyone that the cylinder is a dot amid vastness, and also that the vastness is a home for dots. We build redundancy not only in systems but in meaning. If the reactor fails gracefully, the garden's algae will keep breathing for a time, and the people will keep singing. Mental health is infrastructure. Counselors are as respected as propulsion techs. Conflict resolution is a sport with referees and applause. Grief has a room. Joy has a schedule. 8. Navigation, time, and truth. Relativistic travel makes clocks argue. A ship moving at a healthy fraction of light speed will experience time that is measurably different from Earth's. That's not philosophy, it's accounting. The mission timeline has 2 columns, ship time and Earth time. Messages arrive with dates in both languages. In the ship's library, the news from Earth is a river that moves too slowly, like a letter from your grandparents written before you were born, offering advice that still somehow lands. Navigation cheats with pulsars, those lighthouse stars whose radio and X-ray flashes are so regular they humble metronomes. A triad of known pulsars in the forward sky gives the ship coordinates independent of Earth. Star trackers map constellations warped by speed, aberration, and Doppler shifts are not nuisances but tools. AIs learn humility. They have supervisors with vetoes and hearts. The last questions you ask before launch. Is there a world worth the risk at the other end? We will not aim a city at a rock unless that rock promises rivers or caves or atmospheres we can edit without sin. First, the scouts multiply. Not one sail, but hundreds. Their data stacking into maps and weather. Second, we commit to a right of return, not for the ship, which cannot U-turn easily, but for any who wish not to be born under a new sun. That requires ferries between habitats in our own solar system, a diaspora that makes home a plural word. What if we find life? We do not land in a cradle already occupied. The city carries patience. It can break into an orbit, build habitats in space, converse with a biosphere via observation for as long as is just. The ship is not a spear, it is a guest, and the guest knows where the door is. What if we fail? Then the mission becomes the message. The telemetry of an ending is the curriculum of a beginning. We will build black boxes like those in aircraft, armored vaults that eject with the last sigh of the ship, broadcasting an epitaph of lessons for the next try. We will have practiced at scales where failure is survivable long before we risk lives. A timeline told with honesty. We resist the temptation to lie with dates. The Scout Bridge is a few decades if we choose it. The City Bridge is longer the work of this century and the next, but the work pays as it goes. Energy systems that clean economies, closed-loop habitats that teach Earth how to waste nothing, governance experiments that remind democracies how to last. One way to tell the truth is to write it like this. Years 0-10. Build cislunar logistics. Begin lunar power and mirrors. Fly LEO sails. Draft the charter. Years 10-25. Interplanetary sails. Lunar arrays scale. Desert receiver arrays rise. First interstellar precursor goes. Ring 1 spins in lunar orbit. First beamed scouts test braking. Years 25. 40. Alpha proximate flies. The world watches a pinprick of light leave a line. Data returns before the oldest engineers retire. Drive test demonstrates sustained fusion in deep space. Legal frameworks mature. Kids in public schools can recite the preamble to the Interstellar Commons Charter like a song. Years 40-70. Shakedown habitat tours the outer system. The heliopause is crossed and kissed. Problems are found and fixed. The diaspora of habitats blooms around Earth and the Sun, a solar archipelago, where failure is survivable and success is contagious. Year 70+. The first ark launches, not to plant a flag, but to plant a community in orbit around a chosen sun. Somewhere, a child born on board learns to read by tracing the names of dark nebulae painted on the ceiling above their bunk. Do you notice the trick? At every step, you can stop and still be better for having taken it. This is how you sell a cathedral to a species that loves ovens and votes. You make each stone useful by itself. XI. The day. Return to the balcony and the desert and the beam. The sail on the pad looks like a puddle of mercury caught in a web. The payload at its heart is a dot that has consumed 10,000 meetings, a dot dense with hope and checksum routines and an attitude that leans forward. The woman's voice says, "Beam lock." Someone laughs not from joy exactly, but from the relief of a held breath released. The column of light is invisible. You see it only by its consequences. The sail shivers, tightens, and then begins to climb, not like a rocket clawing on flame, but like a tissue drawn into the throat of an invisible beast. It ascends without smoke. It becomes a coin, then a freckle, then a rumor. For a minute, the wind lifts grit, and you squint Earth asserting itself. The mirrors tremble as motors sing. Children count without being asked. In a far control room, a number on a screen keeps changing velocity, and next to it, another number temperature, and next to that, a third link margin. Engineers make faces, half prayer, half math. The array tilts fraction by fraction to lead the target as Earth spins. Somewhere the beam grazes a patch of dust on a lens, and a sensor barks, and a tiny door closes, rerouting power along a path that did not exist an hour ago. This is what we mean by a civilization, redundancy that feels like grace. Then the push ends. The sail is a new thing now, fast and alone. For the first time, its brain looks away from home and toward destination. It sniffs dust with a small instrument. It watches the forward sky warp. It sends back a word in laser, a word we chose when we tested the transmitter in a lab, a word that promised nothing and everything. Hello, 8-4. That hello takes minutes to arrive at a near receiver, then seconds to trickle through fiber to the balcony where it becomes sound, and then applause, and then something beyond applause. The children shout. The adults do not shout. They feel a knot in their throat untie. It is a tiny mission by any old epic, and it is the hinge, endings that begin. We haven't reached other stars yet because we are not done becoming the kind of people who can live with their consequences. The blueprints above are not decrees. They are provocations and checklists and invitations. They admit we must feed the hungry and cool the climate while we dream. They insist the dream helps. Closed loops for farms, better batteries, better mirrors, better ways to assemble consensus and to forgive. In a few months, the sails whispers start painting pictures of the space between, dust grains counted like snow, magnetic fields mapped like old trade winds, the dark made not empty but textured. In a few decades, a different whisper arrives from a different sail, a smear of an alien sun, a curve of a planet, a spectrum with a notch that makes biologists argue and poets lean on tables and stare. In a century, the hull of the first city hums under hands that tighten bolts. Someone smudges grease on their cheek and doesn't notice because the speaker is playing a song written on Earth when oceans still warmed and politics still groaned. This book ends where work begins. If you listen for a verdict, it is this: the reasons we haven't gone are not permanent. They are assignments. Distance is big, but budgets can be bigger. Time is long, but cultures can be longer. Biology is fragile, but ingenuity is stubborn. Politics is noisy, but stories are louder than noise if we tell them well enough to outlast us. Tonight, step outside. Lift your phone and muffle it in your pocket. Let your eyes adapt. Find the Milky Way if your sky allows. If it doesn't, find the brightest star you can and gift it a minute of attention you didn't think you had. That light crossed space with indifference and fell into an eye that can weep. It is both ordinary and a miracle. So are we. We haven't reached other stars yet, and still, in 1,000 labs and shops and kitchens, the bridge is being built mirror by mirror, bolt by bolt, lesson by lesson. One day, not as legend but as news, we will say, we are in orbit around another sun. And somewhere an elder will smile because the line has been rehearsed for generations, and somewhere a child will ask the only question that deserves to follow it, "May I see?"